Does anyone remember the post on the forum Unexplained Coroner's Mysteries in the early 2000s about a girl named Emma DuPont, France? She was shot while in hospital under police custody, but there was no information about why she was shot. I remember reading the article, but I can't find the forum post anywhere. The story stuck in my mind, so I decided to investigate a bit further. What I wasn't expecting was to be led down this really crazy rabbit hole. When a teenage girl disappears, the whole community of Montalban in south of France is thrown into a pit of chaos and disbelief. The young girl, Emma DuPont, had known nothing but pain and sickness her whole life. According to public records, she'd been struggling with the after effects of hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, HPS, a viral disease from a young age. Emma wasn't able to play as the other children did, as the virus had affected her lungs, and as such, she needed a lung transplant. She was unable to walk long distances, nor jump around on the playground like those her own age. How does a girl who was as sick as she was just disappear with no trace? The following is what I've been able to piece together with the help of archived internet posts, public records, and even old newspaper clippings. On the 26th of May 2000, the town of Montalban, a sunny, popular tourist destination, was turned into a crime scene. The picturesque little town was built mainly of reddish brick common to the area, and stands on the banks of the Tarn River. The community was a close-knit one, and everyone would help keep an eye over the children as they played. On that fateful day, the children had decided to play on the old bridge near the museum, throwing stones over the edge of the bridge and listening for the plop as they landed in the water. The old bridge was far enough from the houses that no adult could watch over the children that day. A mistake that would haunt everyone in the town for the decades to come. Emma DuPont, age 15 at the time, was particularly cheerful that day, as she would be able to play along with her friends, the bridge being close to her house, and she would be able to walk the distance unaided. The other children soon tired of the game and headed towards home. Emma's closest friend, Charlotte LaRue, was walking slowly with her, but situations like this were really difficult for Emma, and she snapped at Charlotte to go ahead of the group. Charlotte would later say that she stormed off in a fit of her own, tired of Emma's mood swings, and regrets it to this day. At around 6 p.m. on that fateful day, fear grabbed a hold of the community. Emma had left early in the afternoon to play with her friends, which would normally result in her being home earlier than usual due to exhaustion. Even if she had stayed out later than normal, her curfew was 4 o'clock on a school night, and Emma was never late. By 5 o'clock, Mr. and Mrs. DuPont had tried phoning friends and hospitals before phoning for the police. This was a time before Apple Watches and smartphones, and there was no way of tracking Emma using technology like we have today. The police interviewed all the children, and they all agreed that Emma had been in good spirits until it was time to go home. According to Charlotte LaRue, Emma had been deeply affected recently by the fighting between her parents, and possibly a divorce was foremost in her mind. Emma blamed herself and her sickness for the reasons why her parents were fighting. Nothing had been the same since she had returned from the hospital. She also said that due to all the fighting and strain at home, she was reluctant to go home, but she was sure that Emma would have indeed gone home, as there was nowhere else for the girl to go. A massive search party was formed, and the groups of searchers set out in all directions from the old bridge. At 9 o'clock, the search was called off for the night. The police noted that although Mrs. Alice DuPont appeared to be frantic to the point of hysterics, her husband, Mr. Louis DuPont, was stoic and reserved. Although this didn't immediately raise suspicions, it was noteworthy. Early the next morning, the search continued and sniffer dogs were brought in. The searchers spread out to cover as much ground as possible. Because most people didn't yet have cell phones, it was necessary for each searcher to have a whistle to draw attention should Emma be found. The sniffer dogs picked up Emma's scent along the bridge, but the trail ended there. The streets of Montalban were searched and searched again. Garbage bins were tipped over and gone through with a fine-tooth comb. Divers were also brought in to search the River Tarn, fearing that Emma had fallen into the water and was dragged along by the current. They searched up and down the river, but there were no signs of a missing girl. At 9 o'clock, the search was called off again. Hope was slipping through the fingers of those involved. Could a girl who was so sick survive another night outside, somewhere lost in the streets of Montalban or in a bush somewhere along the river? The next morning, the search party was led to cover the botanical gardens and fields nearby. Searchers were now losing hope at finding Emma alive. But they had to find her either way. The botanical gardens was full of bushes and trees, and the search took hours to complete. Again, there was no signs of Emma. No clothing, no shoes, no bag, or even a scrap of her clothing. Nothing. The search through the nearby farmland was also fruitless. Day number 4 was much the same. The radius of the search area grew, but any hope of finding Emma slowly dwindled to a trickle. Mrs. DuPont was inconsolable, and her friends and family gathered around, doing their best to help the family stay strong. However, it appeared that Mr. DuPont was either not reacting or was just being strong for his wife. There were several TV appearances made by Mrs. DuPont begging for the return of Emma, or at least a call to let them know that she was okay. Mr. DuPont was only present for a handful of the interviews. Police began to speculate as to the cause of Mr. DuPont's lack of information and abnormal behavior. Day 5 was heartbreaking. Day 6 was worse. Day 7 began with no hope of finding Emma, and Mrs. DuPont began to prepare herself that Emma was indeed gone forever. The number of searchers had slowly decreased over the days, and now there was only a small number of people left still searching. Many of the searchers returned to the areas that had been previously searched, but now they were looking for clues as to where her body might be. As the sun began to set, there was suddenly a loud shrill sound of a whistle being blown. The entire area went silent. The whistle blew again. Emma had been found. All searchers rushed towards the sound. They got to the riverbank and stopped, all confused. The whistle blew again. The sound was coming from a small island in the river. Everyone was sure that the entire island had been searched more than once. But a searcher came into sight on the edge of the island, along with a gentleman dressed in fishing gear. The police quickly cordoned off the area, and Emma's parents stood on the bank of the river, desperate for news about her. A cheer went up in the crowd. Emma was alive, but unconscious. A paramedic team was dispatched to the area urgently, and Emma was taken to the nearest hospital, Hospital de Montalban. Everyone from the town was anxious to see the girl, and there was a large group of people at the entrance to the hospital when the ambulance arrived. Police were needed to move the onlookers back and make way for the ambulance crew, Emma and her parents. It was late at night when the parents released a press statement. Emma was still alive, but still unconscious. However, inside the hospital, a deeper concern were the cuts into her chest and abdomen. The cuts were long and made with a very sharp instrument. The incisions were made with almost perfect precision, and doctors agreed that it would have been someone with a reasonable knowledge of medicine to be able to make the cuts. What was even stranger was that the cuts were stitched closed again, and once again, doctors stated that this would have been done by someone with a greater knowledge. What was apparent, though, was that the person or persons who had done this were using outdated equipment. where dissolvable stitches were now used for most procedures inside the body. These had been done with the type of stitches that hadn't been used in decades. The type of stitch used was also antiquated. A news crew snuck in a hidden camera within a handbag of a nurse into the hospital. The footage taken was concerning. Emma lay in the hospital bed. Her skin was white as snow, and her breathing was labored. She had electrodes attached to her chest, and machines all around her beeping in rhythm. Her parents were standing on either side of the bed, screaming at each other, blaming each other for what had happened. At the entrance of the room were 2 policemen. It's possible that the authorities were worried that the person who had done this to Emma would come back to finish her off. The whole town held its breath, waiting for Emma to wake up and identify her assailant or assailants who had done this to her. No one reported any strangers in the area at the time, and the suspicions of each other's neighbors and friends were gnawing at the town. An answer was needed, and soon. What happened next was only vaguely documented by the police. Emma's parents had been screaming at each other again, one on either side of the bed. The officers outside the room popped their heads into the door and suggested that they take the argument outside to not upset Emma, as she could wake up at any moment. Officer Monet later said in a statement that Emma started to slowly open her eyes and her parents gasped in happiness. He closed the door so as to afford some privacy and went to find a doctor to inform him of the development, so that Emma could get the treatment needed. Suddenly, there was a gut-wrenching scream of pain from Emma's room. It was high-pitched and sounded unearthly. Seconds later came another scream, but this one was higher in volume and lower in pitch. The police rushed to the room and broke down the door that refused to open. Gunshots rang out and brought the whole hospital to a standstill. Officer Monet would later describe in his statement that Emma was covered in blood and stood over the bodies of her parents. She lunged forward at the officer, and he had only seconds to pull out his gun and fire at her before she reached him. A bullet struck her directly between the eyes, and all life was extinguished. I've looked online for more information about the event, but there is only a very vague statement from the police officer. The article I did find that led me down this rabbit hole was the coroner's report. Unfortunately, it has been deleted since, so this is what I do remember from it. Although the bullet had stopped her at the hospital, her body had been dead days before she was found. We don't know for sure what signs there were or weren't when she was being monitored at the hospital, but something must have been amiss. When the coroner opened up Emma's abdomen, her organs were in all the wrong places. I don't mean slightly moved. I mean her lungs were in her pelvic region, and her spleen was above her heart. Everything had been carefully removed and put back in the wrong place. My first thought when I learned this was that it was a Jack the Ripper copycat. But he didn't put his victims' organs back into the bodies. The care and precision that was taken to move around the organs must have been extraordinary to have Emma wake up and move again. How long she could have continued to live, we cannot even begin to fathom, because we don't even know how she lived at all. The most frustrating piece of information that I would have liked to research more was that her lungs, although in the wrong place, were perfectly healthy, and there was no sign of lung damage that she had suffered. The forum post ID was 049 on the forum. I'm not sure why that number stuck with me for all these years, but it has. If you have a copy of the original post or an archive link for it, please let me know. With all this information out there for people to go through, there are several theories on the internet as to what happened. I'm not ruling out a serial killer version, as it is possible, considering the number of missing persons in France that year and sightings of a man in a bird-like mask in those areas. Some people on the internet have laid out that it was an alien abduction that was covered up by a shadowy organization, and that the aliens were experimenting on Emma. But I don't share those beliefs. There must be more of a human cause for what happened, but as of this video, there is no official cause. Although, on an interesting side note, the police officers that were there that day, as well as the coroner and some of the hospital staff, have either died or disappeared under mysterious circumstances since the incident. I could not find anyone there that day who witnessed the incident, its aftermath, or the autopsy to interview for this video. With the strangeness of this video, you can see why it is stuck in my mind for all these years. If you have any ideas as to the possible cause behind Emma's death and apparent reanimation, leave a comment down below. Also, if you have any information about the disappearance and deaths of all of those involved that day, again, please let me know in the comments. This is Secrecy, Crimes, and Paranormal, signing out. After my last video about the case of Emma DuPont, Sue Grace contacted me about her brother's disappearance. She gave me the following details about the case. Her brother, Dave Grace, age 83, had failed to return calls or emails for days, which was very unusual. And after 3 days, from the day when the communication ended, the police were contacted to do a wellness check. There was no answer at the door of the apartment, and with no cause to worry, the police moved on, suggesting that he may have gone away without telling her. After a week, Sue was nearly hysterical. Something felt wrong. Her brother was very socially awkward, had strong anxieties, and didn't venture beyond his front door if he didn't absolutely have to. Despite this, they were in contact nearly every day. Her family told her not to worry, as Dave was probably just absorbed in some new computer game or on some new conspiracy that had to be proven true. She asked the property manager if he could let her in to check on him. He said that she would need to get the police involved before he could do so. At her wit's end, Sue phoned the police and filed a missing persons report. The police once more went to the apartment, and with no answer at the door, and the door being locked, the property manager used his spare set of keys to let the police into the apartment. What the police and Sue came across was frightening and beyond strange. The large living room window was broken, and evidence suggested it was broken from the outside in. What made that bit of information even more crazy was that Dave's apartment was on the 7th floor. The police said that it was most likely a bird strike and the bird flew away after. The problem with this, as she said, was that her brother didn't like the sun and used window tinting laminate on the already sturdy tempered glass, making it even stronger. In her opinion, it would have had to have been, quote, a fucking turkey fired from a cannon, end quote, to break the glass. Sue sent me photos of the apartment taken that day. There were hundreds of pictures everywhere. The walls were covered in pictures, the floor had a layer of pictures, and Dave's desk was full of pictures as well. The striking peculiarity was that all of the pictures were the same. Well, almost the same. The pictures was of a naked man cowering in a forest, but the eyes were different in every picture. Some of the eyes were drawn in, some were cut out and pasted from magazines littering the floor of the apartment. While the police were compiling their report, Sue was able to have a quick look at the computer in Dave's room. There were exactly 96 pictures on the desktop. Pictures 1 through 95 were all the same as the pictures strewn across the apartment. The same man or woman hunched over, with eyes having been digitally added to the pictures. File number 96 was corrupted, but was probably just the same as the rest. The police entered the computer into evidence to be analyzed at a later date. It has been nearly a month since Dave's disappearance, and the police have no answers for Sue yet. She is now following other channels to try and solve the disappearance. The only trail that she had to go on was the photos that she had taken with her phone at the scene that day. The apartment had been quickly cleared out and the damage to the wall and the window fixed. In this area of Denver, property was scarce and in high demand. The police had combed the apartment for clues, and none showed up. One of the officers who was involved in the processing of the evidence, in particular the computer, went missing, along with some of the evidence. This only added to the difficulties of the case, and was another unanswered question. Another rabbit hole opened wide open. A reverse search of the picture brought up a semi-meme internet challenge that had been doing the rounds for a couple of years. The image is of a naked man, but there are no eyes in the picture. The text reads, "Eyes are the windows to the soul. The right ones will lead you to nirvana. The wrong ones will lead you to hell." Sounds like nonsense. What nirvana? Did they mean death? I came across a conspiracy forum on which there was some more information, although whether the information is true or not, I cannot determine. It's a place to start, at the very least. On the 6th of September 2006, a photo was leaked onto the internet. The origin of the photo is unknown, despite a crazy team of conspiracy theorists doing their best to track where the photo came from. Many theorize that it was deliberately leaked by a government official, but for what purpose, I had no answer. The photo had the eyes removed. Due to the nature of the photograph, the police were contacted. However, the police did not pay much attention to the information beyond trying to find the origin. With no further leads, the case went cold. Some new conspiracy theory caught the attention of the internet, and it moved on. One report from a policeman on the team who carried out the investigation states that the person in the photo, although showing malnourishment and emaciation, did not show any other concerning elements. According to the officer, it is possible that the person simply suffered from an eating disorder, and due to lack of injuries, there is no reason for the police to be involved. The eyes being removed from the photo probably meant that the person in the photo did not want to be identified. Japanese police and newspapers often use a black block over the eyes to keep a person's identity anonymous. The earliest copy of the meme uploaded to the internet was in January 2013. It appears that the origin of the meme was on 4chan, and that the person who first uploaded the meme was 6stuff432. There is no information about the person, and it appears the person is no longer on 4chan or the internet. There is no way of finding the original poster. The conspiracy theorists have a theory. Surprising, I know. They believe that if you draw in the eyes correctly, the government will come and take you away. Apparently. A handful of persons on 4chan who had attempted to find the eyes had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, much like Dave. Their belongings appeared untouched, and wallets and handbags were still in the location of the missing persons. Every time someone went missing, the crime scene did not make sense. As in the case of Dave, a large window and a portion of the wall to the right of the window was missing. The manner in which the hole had been made appeared to be a crazy amount of force. The only way that the hole in Dave's apartment on the 7th floor could have been made was with a wrecking ball or something similar. There is no logical explanation. Unfortunately, there was no wrecking balls in the area, so that is a dead end, but surely the force used to make the entry point would have affected the people around Dave's apartment. How was it possible that no witnesses saw or felt the damage? Granted that the apartments on all sides of Dave's apartment were empty at the time of the welfare check. The property manager, Peter, of the apartment block said that the circumstances in which the apartments were emptied was strange. He didn't see the actual tenants during the move. There had been a moving company employed to empty all apartments on the same day. Strange, but probably just a coincidence. No one would want to live in an apartment block that had been damaged due to massive forces and loud noises. During my research of the area of the disappearance, I came across a newspaper clipping. Ulla van Dingen had laid a complaint to the police of a naked man in the area in which the apartment block stood. Had Dave had a mental breakdown overnight? Perhaps he had lost his mind and ran away with not a stitch of clothing on his body. That would have been in line with what the apartment filled with pictures. He had obviously become obsessed with the meme. Through a bit of detective work, I was able to get in contact with the chief editor of the newspaper that ran the story of the naked man running past Ulla van Dingen. The telephone call had a strange clicking to it, which reminded me of the olden day detective stories where the phones had been tapped. Or perhaps it was just a line that was faulty. He was able to provide me with some information about the article. Ulla was quite old and frail, so there had been some parts of the story left out, as they made her sound like a nut job. According to her, the man, or possibly even a woman, had run past her on the streets at crazy speed. The person was taller than the door frames it ran past. Some, at a guess, taller than 2 meters. The most distinct attribute was that the person's arms were alarmingly long, almost reaching the ground as it ran. Assuming that she was telling the truth, this shoots down the theory that it had been Dave running naked down the street. What about the other missing person that had been trying to decipher the meme? There is no information about most of them. Perhaps this is due to the fact that 4chan values privacy, and they could be using VPNs for extra privacy. The total number of confirmed missing persons is currently at 7, with several more suspected disappearances, as is the nature of the internet. People come and go on a whim, so it is difficult to say if they disappeared or just moved on. One of the missing persons was quite well known on the conspiracy forum, and it caused quite a stir when he went missing. The forum users were able to trace down the friend of a friend of a friend of the guy. He had been living in a bunker in the Australian outback. He's missing, presumed dead. At the end of the day, there are a couple theories out there to explain the disappearance of Dave. A common belief that has manifested within the circle of conspiracy theorists is that a meteor hit Dave's apartment. A parasite or some sort of chemical native to the meteor infected or influenced Dave and attacked his mind, causing him to leave his apartment and wander off into the night. The same parasite had been spread to the neighbors, and that is why they had also mysteriously left the building. The belief is that the parasite could only live for a couple days in Earth's atmosphere, and as such has died out before infecting anyone else. Other missing people have had the same thing happen to them, and that explains the lack of witnesses and answers, according to the theory. There is no theory or even breakdown of the facts provided by the police, and I doubt that they would put a theory out there that cannot be proven. We can only wait for an official statement from them. The logical explanation is that Ulla van Dingen had exaggerated the facts of the person she saw in the street, or perhaps her aged mind had played tricks on her that night. Perhaps what was written in the newspaper was closer to the truth. Dave becomes psychotic and runs out to the street completely naked. Unfortunately, in cases like this, it is rare for the person to be found again, and for that person to return from the psychotic break. At the end of the day, only Dave would know if the meme or challenge was real, or if it had any bearing on the events. Only he would be able to tell you whether those eyes that completed that picture, in the end, led to nirvana or hell. Thank you all for listening. And this is Secrets, Crime, and Paranormal, signing out. I was looking for a new case that was interesting and possibly unsolved, and then this story fell into my lap. In the touristy town of the Gulf Shores in Alabama, the population is only 9,300, according to the latest census at the time. Most of the permanent residents know each other, and gossip spreads quickly. Gossip has a way of being exaggerated. Each time a story passes on, as is always the case. I found a newspaper interview of one of the local townspeople, and I'm not sure how truthful the article is and how much of it is embellished. With that in mind, we'll start with what Mrs. Josephine Hamilton, the mayor's wife, told the local rag. According to her, there was a strange and haunting mystery involving Mary Sue Dorner. Mary Sue was a tourist visiting the little town, and wherever she went, heads turned, and not always with a friendly eye. Being the town close to the sea has its benefits, but also its drawbacks. Have you asked any of the women in the town about Mary Sue, you would get some discontented, snarky comments about her. Have you asked any of the men about Mary Sue, they'd probably blush. Our subject had no shame about walking around the town in only a bikini with a wide-brimmed hat and a stylish pair of sunglasses. Had Mary Sue been a little more friendly to the locals and hadn't looked down her nose at others, she might have been less of a topic for gossip. By the time she had been in town for 3 days, the whole town knew of her, and she became the attraction for the townspeople to seek out. Mrs. Hamilton said that it even became necessary for the church elders to preach Sunday services about the body as a temple, and anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. I searched a little further into Mary Sue Dorner's life and found this record of an interview with Mary Sue's father taken after the mysterious event. The family was completely devastated by the sudden loss of such a young lady. Mary Sue's father said that she was born to a wealthy family in Florida. When she was a teenager, her father had been transferred to Alabama. Mary Sue harbored resentment towards her father because she had to leave her friends, the blue waters, and the sun-kissed beaches behind. As compensation, her family decided to take Mary Sue to Gulf Shores to get some much-needed sunny beach time. She became so disgruntled when her parents had no intention of going anywhere past their laptop screens. When Mary Sue complained, she was reminded, like a million times before, that they were working so hard to provide for her and her brother with the lavish lifestyle that they were accustomed to. Mary Sue left the hotel room with a huff and made her way down to the beach on her own. For 3 days, it was the same thing every day. Her parents worked, her brother was wrapped up in the latest game on console, and Mary Sue made her way down to the beach. Mary Sue's mother noticed that her daughter was wandering out to the beach in only a bikini every day. She scolded her severely about the dangers of skin cancer due to the harsh sunlight. So she went down to the souvenir shop and bought Mary Sue a really large, brimmed hat to at least protect her face from sunburn. Mary Sue's mother was inconsolable, and her brother was pale and had an expression of shock on his face when the incident happened. Mary Sue's father was certain that the death of his daughter was not an accident, and that the police were not covering all the leads they had. He concluded his interview by asking anyone to come forward who would be able to assist in solving what had killed his daughter, and the persons responsible. There was a reward of $10,000 for any information leading to the resolution of the case. So what happened that fateful day? According to Mrs. Hamilton's interview by the newspaper reporter, Mary Sue had been walking down the main road, popping in and out of small little shops, looking at souvenirs and absent-mindedly browsing through the clothes on offer. She seemed more interested in the conversation she was having on her cell phone than her surroundings. The eyes of Mrs. Josephine Hamilton and 2 of her bridge club's friends followed Mary Sue as she flitted down the main street. Sitting outside a coffee shop, they had a perfect view for the whole main street. Mrs. Hamilton told the reporter that on the opposite side of the road where Mary Sue was walking were a group of teenage boys chasing each other through the crowds as they made their way down the street towards home. Each of them carried a slingshot and a couple of stones in their hands. They had been reprimanded a million times about shooting off their slingshots around people in the center of town. They weren't fazed, but didn't put as much attention into the shots as they otherwise would have. The boys stopped running around and stared as Mary Sue exited the shop. Mary Sue was standing on a corner, waiting for the light to turn green, and dug in her bag and pulled out her compact to check her reflection. Mrs. Hamilton said that she thought something had fallen out of her bag, as there was a small disc spinning in a circle on the ground. Mary Sue didn't seem to notice. Then the next moment, a blood-curdling scream came from Mary Sue as she fell to the ground. Everyone stood up from their seats or came running out the shops to see what had happened. A couple of people ran to Mary Sue, all wanting to help her, but came to a sudden stop when they got closer. Mrs. Hamilton was not able to get closer to Mary Sue's body because the huge crowd had gathered. When the ambulance arrived and placed Mary Sue's lifeless body onto a gurney, Mrs. Hamilton was able to catch a glimpse of the girl. She had horrific wounds on her face, silvery, shiny shards of mirror all over her face and hand. With that, the ambulance rushed away from the scene, as everyone was still standing in the middle of the road, dumbstruck by what they had seen. The general consensus is that the boys with the slingshots were to blame. The boys heard the mutterings and ran off as fast as possible. I found the following leaked coroner's report. Deceased is 18-year-old Mary Sue Ann Dorner. Cause of death, injury to head not compatible with life. Skin is sunburnt and is suspected that the deceased suffered from heat stroke prior to death. Right hand has numerous lacerations from what appears to be slivers of broken mirror, probably caused by the compact found at the scene. The face also has many small lacerations, also suspected to have come from the slivers of broken mirror. Injury to head is a rectangular cavity, approximately 8 centimeters across and 2 centimeters high, at the back of the head and exits in the cranium through a 9 centimeter across and 3 centimeter high rectangular cavity in the front of the head, just below the eyes. It is the belief of the coroner that the item had been blunt and heavy. According to the police press conference held, there was no answers as to what the item had caused the injury, how the item had caused the damage, or where the item was now. Luckily, there were a few working CCTV cameras pointed at the place in which Mary Sue had been killed. Unluckily, whatever footage that may have been caught has gone missing. The police were asking the public to please come forward should they have any footage of what exactly happened. The police believe that the boys with their slingshots weren't to blame, as was speculated by some of the persons at the scene, as the injury was to such an extent that it could not have been done by a slingshot. According to the police spokesperson, there were holes in 2 of the glass windows behind where Mary Sue stood. It was possible that the holes in the window were related to the injury inflicted to Mary Sue, but it may have been a coincidence. There is no evidence either way. According to the owner of the shop behind Mary Sue, the strange holes through the 2 windows of the small clothing shop were only briefly scrutinized. The 2 windows were completely shattered, so it was impossible to tell the shape of the holes. However, the glass scatter pattern showed that the item which broke the windows came in through the back window and out again through the front window. The power required to cause the windows to break and then inflict the injury meant that a large weapon or launcher of some sort would be needed. Anyone around the shop would have seen such a weapon or launcher like that. No reports have been made about such a sighting. Then, of course, we have the conspiracy theories on the internet. The one I like best is the theory that Mary Sue had been assassinated. Her father was very vague as to what it was exactly that he and his wife did for work, saying that it was of no consequence, and that it was in no way related to the death of Mary Sue. All the digging done by the theorists on the internet could not find out what they did as work. The main reason this conspiracy theory got traction is because of the lack of information with regards to the object that caused the fatal injury. Had it been a bullet, there would have been leads to follow. But because the wound was so unusual in shape and size, there wasn't even a slightest clue. Also, nothing was left behind of the item that caused the injury. Sounds like the perfect weapon. There is a dark joke on these sites that it could have been God skipping stones and poor Mary Sue was in the wrong place at the wrong time. At this point, no one really knows, but what is certain is that it was a brutal and random act, which, I think, scares me more than targeted acts. I find myself thinking, could that happen to me? Like I said, This was an interesting story that came across my desk, and I thought I'd share it with you all. If you want more of this, please let me know in the comments. And, as always, this is Secrets, Crime, and Paranormal, signing out. This is not a conventional message in a bottle story. No love message or a broken heart. This particular case is about a ship. Whether there is any truth to the story, I do not know yet. Another YouTube subscriber suggested that I cover a mystery that involved a ghost ship of all things. Apparently, the story really got to her because, although she lived in a seaside town, she was always scared of the sea. The Thalassophobia, the extreme fear of large, open bodies of water, which is actually quite common, affecting between 5 to 10% of people in America. A local newspaper in Salalah, a city in Oman, ran a story in 2009 about an unconventional message in a bottle that was washed up on the shores of the Arabian town. The description of the item was found was a cell phone, probably an iPhone 3, wrapped in a lot of plastic and placed in a waterproof bag. It was a beautiful spring day, and the beaches were full of tourists. The first assumption was that it belonged to some or the other tourist. Trying to find that person would be near impossible, and you have the chances that will say that it was their phone just to get a free phone, even if it wasn't. The 3 children who found the cell phone decided to take it to the closest police station in hopes that the owner of the cell phone would go there. After 2 weeks of the cell phone sitting in a drawer at the police station, unclaimed, 2 of the most senior detectives decided to open up the package. From an interview by the local newspaper, the police officers said that they were hoping to find any personal information on the cell phone that would lead to finding the owner. However, when the police opened the package, what they weren't expecting was dried blood on the cell phone. Luckily, the owner had not set a password on the phone, so they were able to search through the videos and photos, all of the usual tourist shots. But then, they came across a voice recording that took them by surprise. What they heard was horrifying, so much so that the police immediately assumed that it was a joke or a prank. Eventually, the photo and WhatsApp messages that they were able to deduce that the phone belonged to a person aboard a large cruise ship. Judging by the model of phone, the photos, and the voice note, it was from 2008, and as such, it was unlikely that the phone would be claimed now by a tourist. After running the blood against any open cases or any cold cases, it came back negative, and as such, police handed it over to the local newspaper in a last-ditch effort to find the owner and what had happened. I am pretty sure that it went against privacy laws, but the newspaper fell in love with the horror story on the voice note and ran it in the newspaper fiction section. Do I think the horror story is real or fiction? The details seem so real, and there are details of the story that I don't think your average fiction writer would know or think about, unless they had worked on a cruise ship. I'm going to translate the juiciest parts of the voice note. Someone shouted, "Man overboard," and everyone ran towards the source of the sound, towards the bow of the ship. People are strange. I heard a cheer go up, and I can only assume that it was because the person overboard was rescued. A minute or 2 later, I heard a scream that would be called blood-curdling. There are more screams now. It sounds like something bad is happening on the main floor. I've come to my cabin in the staff quarters. I wish I had a weapon on me now, just in case. But there are all these stupid rules for staff. I don't know what's going on, but it sounds like everyone on the ship is screaming now. The sound is deafening. I'm sure that you can hear them on the recording. I snuck out of my cabin and made my way up to the bridge. There is no one else here. I don't know where the captain and the other staff are. There was a lot of blood on the stairs up to the bridge. I have absolutely no idea what has happened, but now I'm scared. Whispering noises, screaming noises can be heard. Laughter can be heard. heavy breathing. Holy crap, that was close. I had just found a new hiding spot when I heard someone running past, screaming. It sounded like a woman. I peeked out and I saw her. Jesus, she was, dear God, she was all cut up. It was Mary, bleeding everywhere. I was going to help her, but stopped dead. And I saw that there was a man with olive skin following her. Jesus, those knives, no, swords. They had to be swords. So long. I only saw it for a moment. They were his arms. No. As long as his arms. He turned my way as I moved further back into my hiding spot. He must not have seen me. I heard footsteps moving away. Jesus! I soiled myself, but I'm alive. We are close to Africa. Maybe the pirates, like in that movie with what's his name? Damn it! I don't want to die. I can smell smoke. I think the ship is on fire. I think I'm going to put my phone in some waterproof bags and make a break for the lifeboat. Maybe I can get away before he and his friends find me. Dear God! Mary! I'm so sorry, Mary. Please forgive me. If only we could have access to the original recording. It would be easier to decipher the recording if it was real, if we could hear the original person's voice, and possibly hear the screams. It would help us confirm if this is real or fiction. There was a selfie of a man posted with the article. It looks like it was taken on a ship called the Remembrance. However, there was no ship registered by that name in 2008. I did some digging about things that I could see in the picture, and I'm pretty sure that it is a Trojan-class cruise liner from the SCP World Cruise Company. However, according to records, there are only 3 made. 2 are still in operation today, named Get Me Not and the Memory Lane. There was a 3rd ship built at the same time called the Happy Palace, but on its maiden voyage had some accident when it was heading back from the cruise that went through the Suez Canal, and the fire gutted the ship completely and killed everyone on board. The damage was apparently so severe that the ship was decommissioned. From what I can see, there was no ship called Remembrance anywhere near Africa in 2008, or even 2009 for that matter. There was no other information, but I'll venture a guess that the company would try to cover up the accident. That would be some really bad publicity. I popped off an email to the company asking about the cruise liners that used this specific route in 2008. I was particularly interested in what happened to ship number 3 that year. It seems like a big coincidence. I received a very generic response that the ship number 3 had experienced a fire event, then was decommissioned thereafter. They are quite sparse on the details. How frustrating. I mailed a friend of mine who was into ships about it. He told me that it was just a ghost ship story, a pretty famous one in the coastal areas around Ceylala. He thinks that it's probably where the person who made the recording heard about it. The story goes that one night the gates of hell opened up and the ship sailed out of it, though the damned on board, screaming because they had escaped hell. As the celebrations died down, the evil fire ship sailed off into the horizon to find people to torment. In my friend's opinion, someone heard the ghost story and decided to make a prank about it by recording false audio, pretending to be on the ship, and photoshopping pictures of the ship and putting it on a phone. Why anyone would do this, he doesn't know. But people do weird things for attention. There are, however, some people on the internet that believe that the Illuminati owned the ship and that they were trying to gain immortality from a satanic ritual, sacrificing people on board the ship with ceremonial swords, and that before the purser could reach the lifeboat, he was attacked and dropped his phone in the water, conveniently inside waterproof bags. Once it was over, they covered it up. and by the time the phone came to light, it was just a ghost story to be told around a campfire. Others believe it was a passenger that snapped and started killing off others on board the ship. Most people think that it was just a tactless prank done by someone with too much time on their hands, though, much like my friend. We will never know what happened to the ship that never was, but it does make an interesting story. A message in a bottle from a ghost ship. This is Secrets, Crime, and Paranormal, signing out. Just letting you know that, unfortunately, due to YouTube, I have to change some words. I'm sure that you'll get the meaning. But onto the story. My sister-in-law unalived herself under incredibly strange circumstances, and my partner and I both agree that her death deserves some investigation. Sharon loved life, loved her work, and loved making others happy. Sharon also loved children, and it was clear that she would be an amazing mother one day, and she was looking forward to that time in her life. At a funeral were many of her friends and family, and no one believes that she would do this to herself. A year or two ago, I spoke to Sharon about the area her bookshop was in, as she owned a small second-hand shop in a rough neighborhood. I'm certain that she could have perhaps found a better job, or at least moved her bookshop to a better part of town. But she was stubborn, and one day, over coffee, she told me the following. It wasn't unusual for kids to hide away in a second-hand bookshop, and she wouldn't find them until the next day when she opened up. It saddened her heart to know that these kids weren't even missed by their parents during the night. The small spark of hope, however, was that these children were reading. She had watched over the years as some of the kids had to read harder and harder books, developing their minds, and at a good pace too. The schools in the area had no funding for libraries, and the libraries in the area would often not lend books out to kids of a certain age because of theft of books. That's just the way the system worked, and she, being a kind soul, may have pushed it a bit too far in making sure that there was water and food in the little second-hand bookshop. A bowl of fruit on the counter and a water dispenser didn't garner much attention from other patrons. She did, however, draw the line when they wanted to spend all day in the shop. She chased them out off to school and was sure that only some of them actually went to school. She believed, however, no matter how useless it may seem to the kids, it was still important. On the 5th of January 2021, Sharon sent me a photo of a newspaper clipping and asked me if I could make any sense of what happened. A child, Jordan Brown, aged 9, had been found deceased in her shop. At first glance, it appeared that he had done it himself, and evidence showed that he had used a pair of scissors to cut himself. According to the article, for which she was also interviewed, she said that she was heartbroken at the loss of Jordan, but was scared at the same time that people would blame her. She stated that she would never harm any of the children that she was so fond of. The article continued that police were wary to say Jordan had taken his own life, and were focused on the event being a homicide, as is understandable with a child being so young. The community was outraged, but they weren't sure what they were outraged about. I received a WhatsApp message from Sharon. She had been taken to the police station for questioning. She said that it was obvious that they didn't believe her assertion that she was not at the shop, and that the shop was locked. What could cause a 9-year-old child to unalive himself? Sharon handed over footage of her security cameras inside and outside the shop. She sent me a copy of the footage via email later that day. The footage shows Sharon leaving for the day and locking up. The camera inside the shop showed Jordan wiggle out from under one of the bookshelves. He switched the lights on and helped himself to an apple on the counter and a glass of water. After eating, Jordan had walked through the aisle, scanning through all the books. After a bit, he stopped and pulled out a book from a shelf in front of him. The book didn't look remarkable in any way. He sat down to read, and at this point, the camera in the shop goes to static. The camera outside the shop continued running, and it showed that Sharon did not go back to the shop that night. In fact, no one went in or out of the shop until Sharon opened up the next day. The day after Sharon's funeral, the shop being all dusty and in disarray brought tears to my eyes. I was lucky the landlord was there, and he was able to download a copy of the footage from the 2 cameras for me. I returned home, made myself a cup of coffee, and started the arduous job of watching through hours and hours of footage. A few days after the loss of Jordan, the bookshop was cleared to open up again. When Sharon went back to the shop for the first time, she stood in place for what seemed like forever, just looking around the shop. Books appeared to have been thrown around. What immediately stood out to me was that there was no blood anywhere in the shop. Surely there would be. According to the article, Jordan had bled out in the shop. From the disarray, it appears as though there had been a fight, and that the child had struggled. Was there perhaps another child that had hidden in the shop that night, and they had gotten into an altercation? I hadn't noticed any other children in the footage, but perhaps one had been hiding and came out when the static happened. Sharon quickly looked up, and the next time she was seen on camera was after the cleaning crew had been. When I had spoken to Sharon shortly after the cleanup, she wasn't sure if she wanted to open again. However, footage showed the next day that she arrived early in the morning and started sorting through the books that had been scattered around the shop and putting things to the right. A couple hours later, the shop was open, and it was absolutely packed. It was clear on the footage that most people weren't there to buy books. They were there to satisfy their morbid curiosity and gossip. As the crowd thickened, Sharon sat quietly in the corner staring out the window. She was startled out of her reverie by a customer who came up to the counter with a book. The footage isn't very clear, but it looks like the book had a blue cover and the title on the front. I could barely make out the name of the book, some non-fiction book about American history. It was clear that the customer hadn't brought the book to her to buy. He'd come to her to ask a question about the book. Sharon opened the book, and all the pages were all empty, completely empty, from front to back. Sharon must have been completely baffled. What could have happened to the book? Was it perhaps a misprint? She put it under the counter, said something to the customer, and he nodded and left. Sharon returned to the corner, staring out of the window. There was nothing of interest in the days that passed, and I got bored watching the daily comings and goings of a small second-hand bookshop. It wasn't any surprise that no kids had been hiding in the bookshop after the closing time anymore. My partner and I made it a trip up to the city and started sorting through Sharon's things. Her business records showed that there was a large dip in sales since the incident, and there were some notes that Sharon was considering closing the shop and moving. She wouldn't be making plans if she was considering killing herself. I returned to watching the footage when we got back home. My curiosity had returned. On the 7th of April, 2021, Sharon opened up the shop and was tackled by a child in a blue puff jacket who came running up to her and hugged her. They talked for a couple minutes before he ran off to, hopefully, go to school for the day. It was clear that Sharon now had a new energy, and she really jumped into cleaning and sorting the bookshop that morning. Knowing Sharon the way that I do, I knew that she had decided to stay. The kids would return, and she needed to be there for them. Later that day, likely after the school had closed for the day, the same boy walked into the little second-hand bookshop and greeted Sharon with a hug. He then wandered down one of the aisles to look for something to read. Almost an hour later, another child, perhaps a little older, walked into the shop and walked straight up to her. They talked for a bit, and then Sharon led him down one of the aisles and showed the young boy where he could find what he was looking for. He settled down to read some books and appeared to be writing an essay. A couple minutes later, he came up to Sharon, who was dusting, to show her a book that he'd opened. The pages were all blank, the same as the American history book, only this was a biology book. I zoomed in on the footage. The dust cover, as a hardcover book, showed an image of a biology lab. It looked completely normal. However, When Sharon opened the book, the pages were all blank. Sharon quickly made her way around the counter and grabbed the American history book under the cash register. Both books were the same. They looked fine from the outside, but all the pages were blank. Sharon grabbed for a pen, possibly making a note to search the titles of the books on the internet. The pen she grabbed was empty, and she threw it aside. She grabbed another pen, and it was also empty. I could see that Sharon was quickly losing a sense of humor and grabbed a pencil. She wrote down the titles and was moving back to the computer when she was suddenly distracted by something off camera. Sharon came back into view, helping an elderly man towards a seat, and I could see the elderly man coughing and hacking. He had a book in one hand and a very distinctive red and black cover, and a large gold lettering in front, a Chronicle of Davis. In his other hand was a plastic bag that he was bent over and hacking into. She took the book from him and sat him down in a chair. She bustled off to get a glass of water. When she returned, the old man was reading the book again. She gave him the water and was called away by another customer. Sharon returned to her position behind the counter. She hadn't been on the computer for 2 minutes before she turned back to the old man, who appeared to be hacking again. It appeared that Sharon had ordered a cab and sent the old man on his way back home. I noticed, however, that the old man took the book with him, hidden under his coat. Sharon returned to the computer, and after a furious typing and working on the computer, Sharon shook her head in what was obvious confusion. She was quite particular about the books she put up for sale. She checked each one as they came in to determine whether they were sellable or not. She would definitely have noticed the blank pages before putting the books on the shelf. After a couple hours, Sharon was sitting behind the counter with a cup of coffee and was paging through the local newspaper. She stopped on what I think was page 3 and was clearly upset. I was able to make out a name of the newspaper and went online to investigate. There, at the top of the page, was a small article about an older gentleman who'd been found after taking his own life. 1 death, maybe 2. Hell no. Something was wrong. Very wrong. A couple of days passed of nothing but the normal goings-on at the shop. There were a couple of kids who managed to hide in the bookshop overnight every now and then. It was about a week since the newspaper article when a young woman brought a box of books. She refused Sharon's offer of money for the books and quickly left. Sharon was quietly sorting through the books when she held up a book. It was the same book that the old man had taken. She was clearly taken aback and dropped the book on the floor. After a couple deep breaths, she picked up the book again. She must have been very intrigued as to what had held on man's attention. The book was a hardcover and was missing the dust cover. She opened the book, and on the inside cover was what I think was a signature. Sharon paged through the book, but it didn't seem to really interest her, and she put the book to one side. When all the books had been sorted and put on the shelves, Sharon turned back to the black and red book. She flipped through the pages while making herself a cup of coffee. She took her steaming cup and the book and settled in the chair behind the counter. This was when the camera footage went to static again. There is no footage from that point until the day I popped my head in to look for the landlord. My grief was intermingled with confusion. A theory popped into my head. Perhaps the red and black book had something to do with all of this. It was possible that the contents of the book were cursed. I shook my head. I don't believe in curses. Perhaps it had something to do with the books that were blank, but there's no linking the 2 blank books and the deaths. I'm appealing to my audience. If you have any information that can clear up this unanswered questions, please pop me a comment below. And for those who are thinking it, I'll just voice this out loud properly. This incident has stuck with me since and has interested me in alternative answers to mysteries. Maybe some that are too far out there. But I know that the police can't answer everything, and not everything falls within what we know is normal. So I started reading and absorbing information online, and eventually decided to make this website, this YouTube channel, to document my journey through the mysterious in the hopes of gaining enough information, contacts, and expertise to figure out what happened to my sister-in-law. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for listening. This is Crimes, Secret, and Paranormal, signing out. After my Jack the Ripper video, Tyrell Shepston from Creek Falls popped a DM to me. He had a similar mystery that needed investigation. Although the case had gone cold, he was desperate for an answer as to who and why. He said that perhaps he'd sleep better at night once the case had been solved. Tyrell was an assistant organizer of an emerging anime convention in Creek Falls, Iowa. I don't know much about the world of anime, and what little I do know, embarrassingly, comes from watching Pokemon while I was growing up. This convention wasn't as big as the conventions in the big cities like Houston. Creek Falls is a small town surrounded by a number of smaller towns. So although this wasn't a large convention, many people were excited that there was going to be an anime event close to home. The first year of the event, Animazing, was in 2017 and was a massive hit. The next convention was held on the 5th of January 2018 at the City Hall. Sadly, the 2018 event was to be the last, as the 2019 convention was postponed to early 2020, and then the COVID-19 immobilized the world in 2020. Tyrell had certain amount of hesitation in contacting me, as the incident had been kept quiet, and he wasn't sure why. The local newspaper had only printed a vague little article on page 7 and a related obituary. Tyrell was worried that if the media grabbed a hold of the case, it would affect future anime conventions. But at the same time, there was a family still desperate for answers. There wasn't much in the way of solid evidence available, but Tyrell had a lot of information to get me started. Due to there having been only a relatively small group of people, there had been a great sense of camaraderie in the exhibition hall that day. Cosplay was also incredibly popular, and the work and effort put into designing and creation of all the different fandom outfits was off the charts. From photos available on the internet, all of the stalls and shops were beautifully decorated to an anime style too, and the photos looked amazing. Tyrell and I met in the cafe in Creek Falls, and he brought with him the newspaper clipping and the incident report of the event planning company he worked for. The newspaper clipping was nondescript, with the usual blah blah blah, but it gave me an idea of where to start. It read as follows. Death at anime convention. Police are investigating the sudden death of a 19-year-old male, James Jordan, on the 5th of January 2018. The incident took place at the anime convention Animazing 2018, held in Creek Falls at the City Hall over the weekend. James Jordan was found outside the arena near the emergency exit. The cause of death has not yet been released by the police, but they have made it clear that there has been a degree of foul play. The police are appealing to the public to come forward should they have any knowledge of the incident. Tyrell said that there had been no reward offered by the family for any information that would lead to an arrest. Naturally, I suspected that he was after the reward, but I couldn't fault him for that. It is strange that the reward offer didn't garner more attention from the public. I had to wonder, why was this incident kept so hush-hush? And by who? I made a note to try and find James Jordan's family. I suspected that they would have some more information. The incident report issued by the company that Tyrell worked for, Big Plans Events Limited, provided me with some more information about what happened that day in January 2018. As is usual, the report was pages and pages long, with the facts being repeated, and the company's name being cleared of any wrongdoing. I'll summarize the report and give you the highlights of what happened, then we'll draw out our own conclusions. Number 1. James Jordan was a visitor to the event and had a level 2 ticket, specifically ticket number 953. This allowed him to visit the exhibition floor for one day of the weekend-long event. The ticket included a voucher for a meal including a drink and one viewing of the highly anticipated new anime coming to America from Japan. Number 2. James Jordan attended the event with a close female friend, Samantha Drew. But they'd got separated at around 1000 hours when Samantha had gotten chatting to a stallholder and James continued along without her. The stallholder of the stand called Fluffy recalls James Jordan stopping at a stall and having a look at some of the items on sale. One of the items that James had inquired about was a big black box with red ears and tails. She had looked around for her price list, as there was no price on the item itself. The stall was relatively busy, so James told her that she would come back later when she had a chance to find the price. He thought his little sister would love the cutesy box. She remembers this in all vivid detail, as the item had been stolen shortly thereafter. Or at least, she believed it had been stolen, as it was no longer anywhere in a store after she had found a price list. She was asked if she thought James had stolen the item, but she said that she didn't believe so. Number 4. No other stall holders could specifically remember James Jordan. Part 2. The incident. Fact number 1. The body was found between 2 dumpsters, but no attempt to conceal the body was made, despite there being bags and boxes in the immediate vicinity. Number 2. The voucher and ticket were found on the body, according to the police report, suggesting that the incident had taken place during the morning. The food stalls only opened at 12 o'clock, and the new anime previews area only opened a few hours later. Number 3. The emergency exit door had been propped open with a flower pot. The stall holder closest to the door, Maggie McDonald, said that the door had been open since she got there in the early hours of the morning. No alarm was heard by anyone, and it must have been bypassed or disconnected. This was investigated as well as a part of the larger investigation, but apart from the negligence of some of the arena staff, using the open door to pop out and smoke cigarettes, there doesn't appear to be any more details of interest. Number 4. Maggie McDonald did not specifically notice James Jordan use the exit. She said that the only people she saw using the door were the event workers in their bright blue shirts and a handful of attendees. Only one of these attendees really caught her attention. She was a beautiful Korean-looking lady. She had red fluffy ears, quite a few red fluffy tails, and wore a skimpy black strapless top and black shorts. She remembered her because the mechanics of the tails were amazing, and the whole cosplay looked incredibly realistic. She didn't know which anime the character the lady was cosplaying as, but she only recently started watching anime. She wanted to ask the lady which character she was dressed as, but a security guard with a dog had frightened the girl, and she quickly made her way to the exit. When she reached the door, she greeted someone out of view, and Maggie was going to wait for her to come back to ask about the character. Number 5. There were no CCTV cameras covering the emergency exit, but there's no explanation as to why. That was pretty much everything in the report that was of interest to me. The rest of the report was about the actions to be taken against staff for the serious misdemeanors and guidelines to be followed in future to prevent such an occurrence again. Tyrell and I chatted about the report for a while, but that was as far as his knowledge went. I went to the local little police station and asked to speak to the detective who'd been assigned to the case. After what looked like much discussion between everyone in the office, eventually a young detective called me to his office. He introduced me as Detective Johnson, and when I told him that I was there to ask some questions about the case, he looked almost scared. It visibly calmed his nerves when I assured him that I wasn't a reporter and was more like a private detective or a concerned citizen. It was easy to deduce that the department was concerned that there had not yet been a resolution to the case. The detective told me that he had not personally been involved with the case, but he had been given the case to follow up on, as it was now a cold case. He pulled out a file that was lying under a heap of other files in the cabinet in the corner. Were those all unsolved cases? The detective said that they had already made most of the information open to the public in the hopes of finding a lead. So I was welcome to go to the Public Records Department. He did me a huge favor, though. He let me have a quick look at the crime scene photographs. I don't know what I was expecting, but the first photo of James Jordan's body shocked me. I'd seen gruesome images before, and I'd seen some messed up bodies in my time, but this one was different. I scanned through the photos, hoping to find a clearer view of the injury the body had sustained. The injury was clearly not compatible with life, and the only way I can describe what the injury looked like was that a very large, blunt object had hit the body in the stomach. Something like a cannonball. I shook my head. The wound was caved into the body, but there was no exit wound. The detective was wary of letting me see the coroner's report, as he wasn't sure that it was okay to make it public knowledge. But the photos told me enough. There were no other wounds on the body besides the hole in the torso. The detective told me that the liver had been removed, but all the other organs had been untouched. This was the end of the information that I could get from the detective. I popped over to the public records, but there was nothing more of interest to be found. Another quick search online, and I was able to find the address that James had lived at in Creek Falls. When I arrived at the family home, it looked horrific. The garden was full of garbage, and the grass was up to my hip in height. I carefully made my way through the front door, which appeared to be hanging on by a prayer. An elderly lady answered my knock. When I started to explain my reason for being there, she went absolutely crazy. After some ranting about gold diggers coming to her for a reward and not actually having any information, she slammed the door in my face. Further knocks on the door were ignored. As I made my way back to my car, a neighbor called me over. Apparently, James's father had passed away last year, and his mother's mental and physical health had deteriorated violently since then. The situation was heartbreaking, but social services were working at having the old lady admitted to a nursing home. Sadly, that would be the end of leads I had to follow. So, what happened? The first theory that comes to mind is that the Korean lady was popping out through the door to meet up with someone, the person she greeted. It's entirely possible that she and her friend hadn't seen anything, and have no information to share. In this theory, someone unknown to us and completely nondescript exited after James and before the Korean lady, and committed the gruesome murder. A vague theory, something I'd expect from a conspiracy nut, is the theory that the young Korean lady had seen James looking at the box with ears and tails. She stole the box, took off the ears and tail, and put them on herself. James had popped out of the emergency door to have a cigarette, and she followed him out and was spooked by the security guard with the dog. I'm not sure what kind of weapon she would have used, but it was likely she didn't want the security guard to stop her. No, that's just downright ridiculous. But maybe, just maybe the Korean lady saw what happened to James, and it is too scared to come forward as a witness. I'd like to appeal to the public, to you guys, and anybody that you know, especially if she somehow sees this, the lady who went through the emergency exit, to come forward. If you have any information with regards to this incident, please contact me or the Creek Falls Police Department. You can remain anonymous if you choose so. This is Secrets, Crime, and Paranormal, signing out. A favorite pastime for me is scanning through some of the more, let's call it, melodramatic newspapers. Some of those stories are hilarious, even though they're written in all seriousness. Perhaps that's what makes it even funnier. I stumbled across a really crazy story, but the fact that it included an interview with an old homeless lady stirs up some sympathy in my mind. The mentally ill are, especially those who are homeless, often neglected by society. The tabloid journalist's name was Chloe Dorner, and after the story was rolling around in my head for a couple days, I decided to reach out to her. What I expected from a level-headed journalist is not what I heard when I spoke to her. It seemed that Doris Bain had made quite an impact on Chloe. and it seemed like she actually believed what she'd heard during her interview. Here is some of the background that Jane had for me. Doris Bain had led a pretty normal life, but when the 2008 global recession hit, it hit her hard. Doris lost her home and had no friends or family who could or would help her. Her only child was in the army and had been deployed in Afghanistan. She had not heard from him in over 2 years. Now, she believed that there was no way for him to find her, and her to find him. Most nights, Doris was able to get a bed in a small, little homeless shelter, and she used her money gained through begging to buy food. There is no way in which she could receive health care. The newspaper reported that there had been 5 deaths at the homeless shelter called Hope Remains. All the deaths had been of the elderly, who were also of poor health. No autopsies were carried out, and the majority of them were buried in a cemetery in unmarked graves. Doris and 2 other ladies at the shelter would always attend the burial, as there were no friends or family, and they thought that everyone should at least have someone there to celebrate their life and to mourn their death. 3 deaths, let alone 5, in a short period of time was more than just a coincidence. Chloe was concerned that no one was taking these deaths seriously, and that there was no investigation into the matter. She could understand why Doris's interview with the police have not been taken seriously. They sounded like the ramblings of a crazy person. This is where the interview gets interesting. Every time the police were at the shelter, they were given information by Doris, who was roommates with the first 3 persons who passed away. Doris was interviewed for the first 2 deaths, but the deaths were ruled natural causes, and after that she was not taken seriously at all. She claimed that there were forces at work that had to be stopped. She knew more people were going to die until the cup was destroyed. She refused to touch it, but the police didn't even give the cup a second glance. At this point, I decided that I would look for Doris myself and get the whole story from her directly. She was actually quite easy to find. All the homeless on the streets of the city knew who she was because of the newspaper article. Doris Bain was a short little lady, 64 years old. She looked much older than she was, but living on the streets ages people quickly. Doris was at the shelter, and she was eager to tell her story to anyone who would listen. I was prepared to take a bag of salt with whatever I heard from Doris. After the first death, when the elderly gentleman, Ben Taylor, was taken by the coroner, he appeared incredibly emaciated and dehydrated, almost as if the fluids in his body had been siphoned away. He had not looked that way before touching the cup, according to Doris. She said that Ben had been in good health when he came into the room. He had then started unpacking some things from his bag, stuff that had been found in dustbins and dumpsters, that he had hoped that he could sell for a penny or 2. One of the 2 items was wrapped in a lot of bubble wrap, and Ben hadn't even opened it up yet. When he opened up the bubble wrap, he found a cup, just a plain, white, ordinary cup. As he turned the mug around in his hands, he suddenly let out a shout of pain. Ben's eyes opened wide, and he looked genuinely scared. It appeared that Ben's hand had become stuck to the mug somehow. The more he pulled his hand away from the cup, the more the cup seemed to stick to his hand. He was becoming more and more frantic, and his voice became dried-out rasp. Ben kept saying that he was thirsty and begging Doris to bring him water. When she brought him a glass, he was unable to drink it. The water wouldn't go in his mouth at all, and just messed down his shirt. When Doris was standing so close to Ben, she smelled something incredibly disgusting and started gagging. They both looked into the cup and looked like urine was in it. Doris moved back quickly, and to her utter disgust, Ben put the cup to his mouth and drank the contents. He gagged and nearly threw up. When he looked up, he looked into Doris's eyes and said that he was so thirsty that he had to drink something. It looked like the mug had refilled. Ben tried to drink more from the cup, but he gagged too much. After a couple minutes of trying to drink water and then trying to drink from the cup, but not being able to because of the gagging, he collapsed to the floor. The mug disappeared, and when Doris turned to the door to call for help, she saw a wine glass on the table next to her bed that she had not put there. After the coroner's office had come to fetch Ben's body, the police interviewed her. She wasn't sure what the point was. They wrote nothing down. According to her, the questions were very wishy-washy, and they seemed completely uninterested in anything she had to say. Doris then left the shelter to get some fresh air, as the room still smelled like urine. A couple hours later, Doris returned to the room that she was staying in. She opened the door, and on the floor was an elderly lady. She was very obviously dead. Doris screamed for help. The coroner's office sent another hearse, and the police came back, while waiting to be questioned. She looked around. There was nothing on the ground in the room. She walked closer, and was horrified and disgusted. It looked and smelled like human feces. On the table was a small milk jug that smelled like the stuff on the floor. She wondered if it belonged to the old lady. The police who responded were the same two officers, and they looked even less interested in anything Doris had to say. With a lot of gratitude from Doris, the cleaner who worked for the shelter came in and cleaned the floor. When he reached for the jug to clean around it, Doris let out a cry and told him not to touch it. He asked if it was her jug, and when she said no, he picked up the jug. He let out a yelp, and the skin seemed to fuse with the jug, as had happened with Ben, and Doris suspected the lady who had been taken away. The cleaner was trying everything to get the jug off his hand. There was a strange smell in the air, something like the smell of blood. He was slowly looking scrawny, like his bodily fluids were being drained from him. The cleaner was going crazy, drinking whatever was in the drug, but not being able to remove it at all. He hit his hand on the window, which shattered. When he pulled his hand back, there were thousands of scratches on his hand. But after he shook his hand like mad again, they had both looked at his hand. The scratches below his wrist were all healed. Trying to smash the jug against the table or floor didn't work. Nothing was working. He went running out of the room, and Doris had climbed onto her bed and sat in the corner of the room with her head in her hands. She knew then that it was the mug/wineglass/milk jug that was doing this. That it was all the information Doris had for me. She knew that the cleaner had died shortly after she last saw him. This death was quickly followed by 2 more of the kitchen workers. The police looked at her suspiciously, but because she had been nowhere near the last 2 victims, their interest in her didn't last long. I was interested in what the police made of all of this, so I popped down to the public records office. The death records have no autopsy reports, and only a generic reports from the investigators. It was decided that the deaths had all been natural causes, old age, and poor health due to the persons coming in off the streets. I was incredulous how they could possibly believe that. I've come again to the same conclusion as I had before all of this. The mentally ill, the hopeless, and the elderly are harshly treated by a cruel world. So, we have a creepy fluid vessels that kill people, as Doris would say. When you listen to a story, you can't help but get roped into a belief. At the end of the day, it's just not possible, and this may very well become a myth on the streets. Then we have the official theory that it was just a whole lot of elderly people who possibly died of natural causes. It seems like too much of a coincidence to me. The theory that makes more sense to me is that there was a contagious infection that spread through the shelter where all the symptoms started to show at the same time. The symptoms appear to include hallucination, paranoia, and hysteria. It's possible that Doris had been infected but managed to survive. Worryingly, if this is the case, then there will be more deaths to come. I hope It was just an unfortunate coincidence. But time will tell. This is Secrets, Crime, and Paranormal, signing out.